This video is designed for Year 12 students studying English language doing the AQA course. In this video I will look at a language and gender question from the summer 2012 paper and show you an exemplar script and then look at the mark scheme and how the script was awarded those marks. So this is the question. It's the second half of the paper and it's worth 48 marks. You're being tested on two different assessment objectives, AO2, which is looking at meaning and concepts and theorists, and AO3, which is how well you apply the context of the extract. So this question was an extract from the opening chapter of A Surgeon's Care, which was a Mills and Boon medical romance novel. Very important, as one of the first things you do, you identify the genre, audience and purpose of the text, very much like you would do in a GCSE English language exam. So in this case, Mills and Boon, usually read by adult women, and the purpose to entertain. The operation was a routine one, but it would be interesting to see the famous Professor Chadwick perform it. Open reduction and internal fixation of a fractured tibia simplistically meant that he would cut where the bone was broken and fit the pieces together before securing them with a metal plate and screws. As she approached the operating table, her brown eyes encountered eyes of icy blue. The ice thawed a little, momentarily, as they stared deep into her soul. He looked back to his work, the contact broken. "Where on earth is Dr. Hatfield?" he demanded of the theatre sister. He didn't raise his voice, but it held a strong note of impatience. Penny cleared her throat. "Where do you want me, Professor Chadwick?" The moment the words were out of her mouth, Penny regretted them. What had made her voice so husky? Blue eyes snapped up to look at her again, raking over her theatre gown and upheld hands. It was a few seconds before he replied, and Penny found herself holding her breath. "Well, I can certainly think up quite a few answers to that question, Dr. Hatfield." His voice had softened, and she could tell by his twinkling eyes that he was laughing at her. "But for the moment, could you hold this retractor?" Penny blushed beneath her mask, glad of its shield. What a perfect voice. It was as smooth as silk. Between his eyes and his voice, Professor Chadwick was having a devastating effect on her equilibrium. What would happen when he degowned and she saw the rest of him? She risked a glance at him, but he found him absorbed in his work. A wave of guilt swept over her. She, too, should be absorbed in her work, not daydreaming about her new boss. So that was the extract that the students sitting that exam were given. Many students who sit this exam choose to take quite a systematic approach and work through the extract almost chronologically in the way that it's displayed. To reach the highest band marks, and I'll just open up the mark scheme to show you, to reach the highest band marks, 15 to 16 marks for AO2, you really need to think about how you synthesize the information, and that's something that I think the exemplar exam script, which I will talk you through, does particularly well. It doesn't necessarily go through the script in a very prescriptive order, but it looks at certain concepts and then works out how to group different elements from the text together. So there are many things that you could look at in this extract. It's quite a rich source for any students that have been studying language and gender. The mark scheme and the content descriptors suggest that students could refer to any relevant concepts linked to gender and list a few examples. So the modern representation of female stereotypes of this genre, the presentation of male stereotypes, political correctness, the representation of occupation, socialization, notions of male and female behaviour, social hierarchies. You could also make reference and should make reference to relevant theorists, and if you have any relevant ideas from language study, including your own research and observations, it's important to know that you can include those as well. In terms of how many marks you're awarded in this question, it's worth 48 in total, so it's worth noting that the balance between AO2 and AO3 isn't 50-50. AO2 is worth 16 marks compared to AO3, which is worth a maximum of 32 marks. So it's interesting to note that distinction. Top band marks synthesize information, so you show sensitive understanding of a range of issues. So there's no kind of real close focus on any one area. There's a conceptualized discussion of ideas surrounding the topic, and there's integrated examples from study which illuminate discussion. What the example I'm going to show you does particularly well is it takes various elements from throughout the whole extract rather than going through in a chronological order, as I've already said, and I'll show you some examples of that as well. In terms of context, and I will just scroll down in AO3, in order to get top band marks, you need to be evaluating the the data that you're given, rather than just describing it or analysing it. So evaluating means you really go into depth, you look at the effect of individual words, and you're very original in the way that you explore that data. Content descriptors for AO3 included that the audience is adult women, the purpose is to entertain, and thinking about the genre, so romantic fiction, with the subgenre being medical. Students could have talked about how it shows a fantasy or an idealised world, and they could make reference to semantic fields of medicine, clothing, and emotions. It's interesting to note the presentations of female stereotypes, for example, including emotions, physical reactions that imply her vulnerability. For example, stared deep into her soul, holding her breath, devastating effect on her equilibrium. The presentation of males, similarly, using a cliched physical description, eyes of icy blue, twinkling eyes, smooth as silk. Further down this smart scheme, contrasting approach to operation, the male is focused, the female is distracted. There's a very clear hierarchy established. Even though she is doctor, he is professor. And the reader learns that her name is Penny, but we don't identify the first name of the professor. There's represented speech and what that reveals about his attitude to females. He's demanding, he's got a strong note of impatience. There's a flirtatious innuendo, which is at her expense. And there's third-person narrative, but the reader is party to Penny's thoughts and feelings, but not Professor Chadwick's. There's also some implied sexual suggestions, as you would expect from Nosy Boom, such as raking over her theatre gown, and what would happen when he degowned and she saw the rest of him. I'll show you the exemplar answer, because it really is a very, very good example of exactly how you should answer this question. It's got 4 marks as well. So the candidate starts off by immediately talking about stereotypes. It doesn't refer to any particular part of the extract, but speaks more generally to start off with. The initial point made is about the character titles, where the candidate says, firstly, the character titles reflect language and society as androcentric. The vocational title of the male lead, Professor Chadwick, connotes academia and a higher intellectual status than that of the female lead, Dr. Hatfield. Although the nature of medical professional means a woman's marital status remains undisclosed, evidence in nurse, sister, doctor, the terminology doctor still has connotations of a male-dominant profession. This is therefore reflective of Spender's view that language conveys male power. So immediately, this candidate has gone straight into where they're going to get high marks for synthesising, analysing. They've talked contextually about the medical profession in general. They've also included quotes. It's interesting to note, in order to get the higher band marks, you really need to be moving beyond GCSE level into a way of writing where you are embedding your quotes. So you're not wasting time by saying, or by writing things such as a quote to support this is, but instead you're going straight into where you're going to get the marks, and you are maximising the time that you're given. Another way that this candidate synthesises information is by adding in their discussion of theorists. Notice something that many candidates do is explain what that theorist said and when they said it, almost as if to show off how much revision they've done. It's fantastic that they know that, but so will the examiner, so you really just need to focus on how that theorist applies to what you're writing and what you have noticed from the data, rather than explaining when that theorist was writing, what they were writing, and explaining concepts that the examiner will already know. To move further through the exemplar answer, the candidate then writes, in addition to this, text H displays implications of how women are socialised to be sexually promiscuous. Phrases such as, when he degowned, and daydreaming about her new boss, illustrates how, despite the extremely technical profession of surgery, the female remains conscious of her sexuality and displaying this. Supportive of this is Penny's speech, where do you want me, Professor Chadwick, in which the verb used, want, becomes sexually ambiguous. This is reflected as the character proceeds to blush on account of the sexual connotations of her speech. So again, a really elaborate, complex paragraph that embeds quotes, doesn't just take them from one section of the extract, but focuses on one concept, the idea of sexual promiscuity and sexual connotations, and then finds the examples all the way through the extract to support their point, rather than just talking individually and taking a very methodical approach through the data. So that's an exemplary paragraph. This is, however, a common and expected feature of the Mills and Boon genre, in which readers would expect an element of flirtation amongst the characters. Also, due to the chapter's position at the beginning of the novel, flirtatious interaction between the characters is expected to establish their relationship. A further representation of gender is how Professor Chadwick replies to this, saying he can certainly think up quite a few answers to that question. The fact that the female contribution was a question, followed by a respectful term of address, contrasted with Chadwick's assertive and assured, especially through the use, certainly, shows how the man is expected to remain calm and dominant. This also portrays confidence through Chadwick's speech, indirectly supporting Lakoff's theory that women are more hesitant in their language use. So again, extremely complicated paragraph, meets both AOs confidently and is synthesising information throughout. So it's a really brilliant example to refer to throughout your revision. It's useful when going back through this video to have a look at the annotations that the examiner has made in the margin, because these are very useful to see exactly where the candidate has met the marks, and met the mark scheme and what exactly they're being awarded the marks for. And there'll be some summative comments at the end which will be useful to look at as well. Furthermore, the verb choices in this piece reveal a lot about how gender is represented in society. The verb choices describe the mode are distinctly active, such as raking, snapped, demanded, and perform. These verbs also connote an active and influential role in society, usually associated with men. The verb choices describe the female also support women's passive and subordinate role in society, for example, regretted, holding, risked, and blushed. Really, really fantastic to have such a close focus on individual words and classifying those, categorising those, showing a real depth of understanding for this very, very short kind of 25-line extract. Furthering the male role as dominant in this text is that he is described as having a devastating effect on the female. This has pragmatic implications of emotional vulnerability associated with women and how it easily falls victim to male dominance. Pre-modifiers and adverbs are also used to differentiate men and women, both intellectually and regarding the influence they have over other characters. Professor Chadwick's eyes are described as icy blue. The use of pre-modifier icy, connoting danger and emotional stoicism. Comparatively, the advanced medical terminology such as internal fixation and fractured tibia is rephrased simplistically for the reader. This is perhaps a recognition of the mainly female audience of Mills and Boon novels and implies that such terminology may be beyond the intellectual reads of some women. And so interesting that they're thinking in great depth about context of this extract, where it would appear, who would be reading it, and they're linking that into their analysis, and that again strengthens this answer. Text H also reflects how girls are socialised for a more passive and cooperative role in society. The female lead of Penny is referred to on a first-name basis, whereas the male lead remains Professor Chadwick. This could imply a subordinate position. However, it is a common feature of Mills and Boon novels to make their female lead seem approachable and relatable for a mass female audience. A further feature of her submissive character is she is described as holding her breath during the few seconds Dr. Chadwick takes to reply. This is used to imply emotional vulnerability, the extent of breathlessness, the presence of a domineering male such as Professor Chadwick. So it starts to lose slight momentum, perhaps running out of time, but still makes some fantastic points, links to genre, and is really synthesising AO2, AO3, thinking about concepts, thinking about context throughout, and a strong conclusion as well. However, Text H also demonstrates how gender expectations are breaking down, as Professor Chadwick is occasionally conveyed as not the stereotypical macho male figure. We see gender roles reversing as Penny's voice becomes husky and Chadwick's is softened. This perhaps reflects the expectations of a modern female reader who may want a more sensitive and personable romantic figure, opposed to cold and masculine traits of emotional disconnection. So really, really strong conclusion. We're not necessarily thinking just of gender roles, but how they may be subverted within this extract. And I think this candidate ends on a really, really strong point to sum up a fantastically strong essay. I'll just scroll down to show you the final summative comments of the examiner. and this is task 2. So for AO2, the examiner thought that it was a very clear awareness of the representation of male and female characters and theory, wholly reliable and sustained conceptualised discussion. Where it says reference the model mark scheme, this is what the examiners are given to refer to show a really top-notch model answer. In terms of context, in AO3, the examiner deemed it consistently insightful. There is an awareness of contextual factors, analyses closely, and examples are integrated. It was an engaged and strong response, and actually got full marks. Just to refer one last time to the mark scheme, there it is. So we can see that if we go to the top of the mark scheme, it fully meets the points. The sensitive understanding of a range of issues, conceptualised discussion of ideas surrounding the topic, integrated examples from study which illuminate discussion, and for AO3, it really exemplifies a perceptive and insightful exploration of contextual factors, and there's a lot of kind of original thinking in this script. Analytical and systematic interpretation of factors and influence of language features. So where the script was mentioning pre-modifiers and specific verbs, and it was integrating those from different places in the extract, and the integrated and helpful use of the data to support the interpretation. Almost every point made in that model answer was supported, often linked to theorists, linked to methods of understanding, to demonstrate on the whole a very, very strong answer, which did get full marks. I hope that's useful. That's the first video I've made talking through a mark scheme and model answer, so I don't know how useful it will be, but you can give me feedback on Thursday's lesson. Hope it has been of some use to you.